Two young ladies standing behind me, Mary and Emily Edmonson, are part of the largest escape of enslaved persons in the history of this country. And where was that? Texas, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, South Carolina. Nope. Washington, D.C. It's 1848. Most of the rest of the world is celebrating the French Revolution. Here in Washington, D.C., there's a plan underway to effect the largest peaceful escape of enslaved persons in the history of this country. It's called the Pearl Incident. I'm here on Pearl Street at the Washington Harbor, and from this location, 77 enslaved persons attempted to escape from Washington, D.C. The idea that all slavery occurred in the South is a myth. Slavery occurred in all of the colonies at one point. Right here in Washington, D.C., many former presidents owned slaves. Congressmen and senators and officials and the like. Here in Washington, D.C., there were slave pens. These places where slaves would be kept for a temporary time. There's one not far from here called the Williams Slave Pen. They would be kept for a temporary time while they were in transit either from one place to another. But there were slaves in Washington, D.C., and the Edmonson family was enslaved. Paul Jennings was a former slave. He was enslaved to President James Madison. He was freed by James Madison's wife upon his death. You might have heard her name. Her name was Dolly Madison. He became an abolitionist, and he worked tirelessly to help people escape from the bondage of slavery. Paul Edmonson was a friend of his. Paul Edmonson had 14 children. He and his wife, Amelia, knew that because even though he was free, Amelia was not, and all of their 14 children will also not be free. So they wanted to effect a change. They wanted to give their children an opportunity to be free and not be enslaved. They had two small daughters, Mary and Emily. And with 4 other of their children, they made arrangements for them to be a part of this largest attempted escape of enslaved persons in the history of this country on a schooner called the Pearl. So Paul Jennings, working together with Paul Edmonson, made arrangements through the local abolitionist society to contract a captain and a crew to sail this ship named the Pearl. The plan was to sail down the Potomac to the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, rounding the bay into the Delaware River, up the Delaware River to New Jersey, where these enslaved persons could be freed. About 225 miles. It's April 15th, tax day of all days. Again, Washington, D.C. is celebrating the French Revolution. There are parades and parties and all kinds of goings on. But these 77 persons make their way to the Washington Wharf. Now, the wharf was not the hustling, bustling center of commerce and activity then as it is now. In fact, it was really pretty sparse. Not a whole lot going on. You had to get transportation to get here. And so these 77 persons, a few at a time, made their way to the bottom of 7th Street, which is where the Pearl was docked, so that they could get on board and make arrangements to begin their journey. All 77 were on board. It's now nighttime, and they stayed below decks, obviously, so they would not be seen. When the ship set sail, they quickly discovered that the winds and the tides were against them, and so they made little progress during the night. Slowly but surely, they made their way down the Potomac River, but as they got to the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, the winds and the waves, the currents were even worse. And so they had to stop and tie up, they had to drop anchor in a place called Point Lookout, Maryland. That was on Saturday night. It is now Sunday morning, and their enslavers are waking up to find people have gone missing. It didn't take long for people to come out into the streets and into the neighborhoods, and everyone's singing the same song. I'm missing my enslaved persons. I'm missing people. I'm missing my this person, that person. and they discovered that this was a huge and concentrated effort of escape. Now, depending on which historian you follow and who you trust, there are two ways that tell the story about how they discovered what happened. One says there was a young man who provided transportation to someone to make it to the wharf for this attempt. The person whom he transported did not have money to pay him, but promised to pay him to send money when he was free and when he was working and making money. That's one story. The other story that I believe is that this young man, whose name was Diggs, Judson Diggs, he had designs on one of the Edmonson sisters. I don't know if it was Mary or if it was Emily, but history records and even pictures show us that they were very, very pretty young ladies. And when one of them, rebuffed his advances, he took it upon himself to get revenge on the entire party by letting someone know about their attempts. So the story goes that these enslavers are looking around town, what happened to their people, and then he comes forward with the information that the schooner named the Pearl, which was tied up at the bottom of 7th Street, has scurried them all the way down the Potomac. So these slave masters, they get together and they devise a plan, and they purchase or contract with a steamship because they know the schooner is a sailboat so that they could make better time. And once they get all the provisions together and about 35 people, they set sail down the Potomac in pursuit of the Pearl on a steamer. And by now, it's Sunday afternoon. Sunday afternoon is when they weighed anchor and went off in pursuit of these 77 persons on the Pearl. All day long, nothing. All day long, steaming. Now, Sunday morning, when they come upon the Pearl, which is moored at Point Lookout in Maryland because it cannot make any headway with the winds and the tides, all 77 formerly enslaved persons were captured and returned to Washington, D.C. And the welcome they got was anything but a welcome. It was a pro-slavery, riotous mob calling for brutality, calling for them to be lynched and punished. Some of them were held temporarily in the William Slave Pen not too far from here, which is located on 7th and Independence Avenue. Some of them were kept in a place in Old Town Alexandria. In fact, the Edmonson sisters, Mary and Emily, were kept there. And the statue that we showed you is in fact in Old Town Alexandria because that's where they were temporarily held. Their enslavers got together to decide on what to do for their punishment, and they decided to sell them all to traders. That meant they would be going down into Louisiana, New Orleans, to the hustling, bustling slave auction place located in New Orleans. In fact, they will be sold south. Their punishment will be disconnection from their families, disconnected from their communities. They will be down in the cotton and rice and sugarcane fields. That would be their punishment. As time and providence will have it, the huge riot that met them had unintended consequences. It thrust this event onto the national stage. Mary and Emily being the poster children or the faces for this event. As it happened, many of the escapees were helped by the Abolitionist Society, who raised money to purchase their freedom. Mary and Emily's freedom was purchased by a church in Brooklyn, New York, who had heard about this event called the Pearl. Another unintended consequence was the Compromise of 1850. It's funny. Here in the nation's capital, we were celebrating the French Revolution. Yet we did not want people to know that people here in the nation's capital were enslavers themselves. Look at the irony there. They were ashamed that the world would now know what was going on in the nation's capital. The William Slave Pen that I told you about not far from here It was a nondescript building. You would not even know it was a slave pen from the street. That's how well camouflaged it was. So the unintended consequences was that Congress passed the Compromise of 1850, which was kind of in the face of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which meant that no longer in Washington, D.C. could slaves be traded or sold. It didn't do anything for anyone already enslaved, but it was the first step in a long journey towards the eventual abolition of slavery. The other unintended consequence was a woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe. She wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin was the social media of the day. It shone a harsh and white light on the brutality of what slavery actually was. And many people who to that point either didn't know what slavery was or didn't want to know were now forced to reckon with it. Even though this escape was unsuccessful in one sense, it was very successful in another sense in raising the specter of slavery in this country. It was successful in beginning a conversation in Congress about what to do about it. It was successful in that some of the 77 escapees' freedoms were purchased, not all of them, and we don't know the destination of them all. But we know about Mary and Emily. Mary and Emily entered Oberlin College. Oberlin College graduated a lot of young Black professionals who were just coming out of the vestiges of slavery. Oberlin, Ohio was a stop along the Underground Railroad. It has so many ties to the abolition of slavery and the freedoms of all people. You should look it up. But there it is, the story of Mary and Emily Edmonson and the Pearl, an incident that happened not in the Deep South, not in Mississippi, Kentucky, Louisiana, Alabama, but right here in Washington, D.C. Frederick Douglass wrote in his paper, The North Star, imagine people fleeing the Temple of Liberty in pursuit of their freedom. He was being sarcastic. And what he was saying was, we cannot hold up Washington, D.C., the jewel of the Republic, as a city on the hill, and at the same time enslave people who, for no reason other than the color of their skin, are seen to be less than the popular majority. Truth be told, our history can be found anywhere, because our history is everywhere. See you again soon.
If you would like to see more videos like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon to receive our new releases. If you would like to assist Truth Be Told in our mission to preserve African American history, which is American history, please share this video with your children, family, and friends. Truth Be Told, you can find Black history anywhere because our history is everywhere.